The folder landed on Patricia's kitchen table with a slap that made her coffee cup rattle. I watched her face drain of color as she stared at the label written in my father's meticulous handwriting. Sarah's protection, open only if necessary. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as they hovered over the manila folder, not quite touching it, as if the paper itself might burn her. "Where did you find this?" Her voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down slowly, deliberately. My hands were steady now, though they hadn't been 20 minutes ago when I'd finally jimmied open the lock on Dad's old filing cabinet in the garage. The same hands that had shaken while opening collection notices and foreclosure warnings were now calm, cold even. "Funny how clarity can do that to you? In the place you never bothered to look," I said. "Right next to his service medals and my mother's wedding ring. The things that actually mattered to him." She finally looked up at me, and I saw it. That flicker of calculation behind her eyes. She was already spinning her story, already deciding which version of the truth to sell me. I'd seen that look before during my deployment, on the faces of contractors who swore they had proper credentials when their paperwork was obviously forged. "Sarah, sweetie, I can explain." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. I took a breath, centering myself the way my shipboard stress counselor had taught me. "Don't call me sweetie. Don't try to explain. Not yet. Just open the folder." Patricia's hand finally moved, flipping open the cover with the resignation of someone who knows the game is over, but hasn't quite accepted it yet. I watched her eyes scan the first page, a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking every dollar that had moved through my accounts for the past 18 months. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every fraudulent credit card application filed in my name while I was 7,000 miles away, standing watch on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf and wondering why my stepmom's emails had gotten so vague. She'd stolen $47,000. $47,000 I'd saved over 8 years of service. Money I'd planned to use for college when my contract ended. Money I'd earned through long watches, rough seas, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from months at sea with no real rest. And she'd spent it on what? I'd seen the credit card statements, designer handbags, a timeshare in Cabo, jewelry, a whole new wardrobe that probably cost more than my annual salary. "How long have you known?" Patricia asked finally, and I almost laughed at the audacity of the question. As if that mattered now. I leaned back in the chair, studying her. The woman my father had married 6 years ago, 3 years after Mom died. The woman who'd smiled at his funeral 2 months ago and squeezed my hand and promised me that we were family now, that she'd take care of everything while I finished my deployment. "I started figuring it out 3 weeks ago," I said. "But Dad?" He knew for at least a year. That got her attention. Her head snapped up. "Look at page 12. I waited while she flipped through the pages with increasingly frantic movements. When she reached it, I saw her breath catch. There it was, a letter from Dad to his attorney, dated 14 months ago, outlining his concerns, detailing his suspicions, requesting that his will be modified to protect my inheritance. "He was going to divorce you," I said quietly. "Did you know that? He had the papers drawn up. He was just waiting for me to come home on leave so he could tell me first, so I wouldn't be blindsided by it." Patricia's face crumpled, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not satisfaction, just a hollow ache where something warm used to be. "But then his heart gave out before he could sign them," I continued. "Convenient timing, wasn't it? Sarah, you can't think I—" Page 15. She turned to it. Medical records, time-stamped. Dad's cardiologist appointments, where he'd been managing his condition for years. Medication logs. And then, in the last 6 months of his life, gaps. Missed appointments. Prescriptions not refilled on schedule. "You were in charge of his medications," I said. "After his first heart attack, He trusted you to make sure he took them on time, to schedule his appointments, to... But before I finish that sentence, I need to take you back to how this whole thing began. 9 months earlier, I was standing in the engineering spaces aboard the USS Halsey, troubleshooting a temperamental pump that had decided to malfunction in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Petty Officer Second Class Rodriguez was handing me tools and complaining about the care package his girlfriend had sent him. All healthy snacks when what he really wanted was red vines and beef jerky. "P.O. Morrison, you've got that look again," he said. I realized I'd stopped working, my wrench frozen mid-turn. I'd been thinking about the email I'd gotten from Patricia that morning. Short. Vague. "Everything's fine here. Don't worry about things at home. Focus on staying safe." It was the third email like that in 2 weeks. "Just thinking," I muttered, returning to the fitting I'd been fighting with. About what? About how "don't worry" is usually when you should start worrying. Rodriguez laughed, but I wasn't joking. Something in my gut had been twisting itself into knots for the past month, and I'd learned in 8 years of service to trust that instinct. It was the same feeling I'd had before we'd intercepted that suspicious vessel off the Horn of Africa, the same prickle at the base of my skull that had made me double-check our security protocols 30 seconds before things got tense. My dad had always said I had good instincts. "You got that from your mother," he'd tell me, ruffling my hair when I was little. She always knew when something was off. Save my ass more times than I can count. I missed them both so much, it felt like a physical wound sometimes. Mom had been gone for 9 years. Cancer taking her piece by piece until there was nothing left but memories and the sound of her laugh that I was terrified of forgetting. And Dad? My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another email. I wiped my hands on my coveralls, leaving dark streaks of grease, and pulled out my phone. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Update on your father." My hands were suddenly shaking so badly I could barely open it. Rodriguez noticed, his joking demeanor vanishing. "How does?" I read it twice before the words made sense. "Heart attack, hospital. Stable but serious. Don't worry, I'm handling everything." Patricia's words, clinical and cold, telling me my father had almost died, and I hadn't even known he was sick. I'd spoken to him 2 weeks ago during our last port call. He'd sounded tired but fine, asking about the deployment, telling me about the garden he was planting, complaining good-naturedly about Patricia's insistence on redecorating the living room. He hadn't said a word about chest pains or doctor's appointments or anything that might have warned me this was coming. "I need to make a call," I heard myself say. Rodriguez nodded, taking the wrench from my hand. "Go, I got this." The call to Patricia went to voicemail. So did the second one. And the third. I finally got through to the hospital, but they wouldn't tell me anything except that he was stable and resting. "Family only for information," they said, which was rich considering I was his daughter and currently sitting on a warship in the middle of the ocean. It took me 6 hours to get through to Dad's room. When I finally heard his voice, weak and raspy but alive, something in my chest loosened. "Sarah Bear," he said, using the nickname he'd had for me since I was 4. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay." "You scared the hell out of me, Dad." "I know, I'm sorry." He coughed, and I heard someone in the background, Patricia probably, telling him to take it easy. "Listen, kiddo, I need to tell you something." The line crackled with interference, the satellite connection terrible as always. "Dad, you're breaking up." "Your accounts." More static. "Important that you check." "I can't hear you." "What about my accounts?" "Just be careful. Trust your instincts." "Like your mom always." The line went dead. I tried calling back 15 times. Nothing. That night, lying in my rack in berthing, I stared at the bottom of the bunk above me and replayed his words. "Trust your instincts." He'd sounded urgent, even through the static and the medication haze. I pulled up my phone and logged into my bank account, something I hadn't done in weeks. I'd set up automatic transfers months ago, most of my pay going into savings, with just enough in checking to cover my car insurance and storage unit fees back home. It was supposed to be foolproof. The balance made me sit up so fast I nearly hit my head on the top bunk. $1,800. I should have had close to $30,000 in that account. My heart started pounding. I checked the transaction history, scrolling back through weeks of withdrawals I didn't recognize. 500 here, 1,000 there, 2,000, 3. All marked as ATM withdrawals or debit card purchases at stores I'd never heard of in the town where Dad and Patricia lived. "What the fuck?" I whispered. The petty officer in the rack next to mine stirred. "You good, Morrison?" "Yeah," I lied, "just homesick." But I wasn't good. I was very, very far from good. I spent the next hour going through every account I had. Checking, savings, the CD I'd opened with my CPay bonus, all of them were hemorrhaging money, and they'd all been accessed with my power of attorney, the same POA I'd signed over to my father before I deployed. Standard procedure so someone could handle my affairs while I was at sea. The same POA that would have automatically transferred to Patricia when Dad had his heart attack and couldn't manage his own affairs, let alone mine. Fuck, I breathed. I should have called someone right then. JAG, maybe, or my bank. But it was 0200 ships time, and I had watch at 600, and my brain was already starting to spin worst-case scenarios that I needed to shut down before they paralyzed me completely. I'd deal with it tomorrow. I'd call during my off-watch period, get this straightened out. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Patricia had needed to access the accounts for something legitimate. Maybe Dad had asked her to before his heart attack, and she'd forgotten to tell me. Maybe I was lying to myself, because accepting the alternative was too painful. I pulled up Patricia's last email again, reading between the lines of her bland reassurances. Don't worry about things at home. Right, because she was handling them. She was handling everything, including my bank accounts, my credit, my financial future, and my father, still in the hospital, had tried to warn me. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, after watch turnover and before the engineering department meeting, I found a quiet corner of the ship and called my bank. The fraud department transferred me 3 times before I got someone who could actually help. "Ma'am, I'm showing that all these transactions were authorized with your power of attorney," the representative said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "Were these not legitimate withdrawals?" "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm deployed. I haven't authorized anything." "I understand, but unfortunately, once you've granted power of attorney, the person holding it has legal authority to access your accounts. If you believe there's been misuse, you'll need to revoke the POA and possibly pursue legal action against—" "It's my stepmother," I interrupted. A pause. "I see. In that case, I'd recommend you contact a lawyer as soon as possible. We can flag your accounts for suspicious activity, but without a revocation of the power of attorney or a court order, there's not much we can do to prevent future withdrawals." My next call was to JAG. Lieutenant Commander Patterson, the Judge Advocate General Officer assigned to our strike group, listened to my story with the kind of patience that suggested she'd heard variations of it a dozen times before. Financial exploitation of deployed service members was apparently depressingly common. "The good news is you have options," she said. "The bad news is most of them require you to be stateside to execute properly. When does the Halsey rotate back?" 3 months. 3 months that might as well have been 3 years. 3 months during which Patricia could clean out every account I had, max out credit cards I didn't know existed, destroy the financial future I'd spent 8 years building. "Can you revoke the POA remotely?" "You can, but it needs to be notarized, and you'll need to serve notice to all relevant parties, the banks, your stepmother, anyone else who might be relying on that POA. And honestly, Petty Officer Morrison, even if you revoke it today, If she's already committed fraud, she's committed fraud. You're looking at potential criminal charges and civil litigation either way. I closed my eyes, leaning against the bulkhead in the passageway. What should I do? Document everything. Screenshot every transaction. Save every email. Keep a log of every conversation. And when you get home, you're going to need a good civilian attorney, because this is beyond what JAG can handle. Understood, ma'am. One more thing, Lieutenant Commander Patterson said, her voice gentler. I know you're scared right now, but remember, you're a United States Navy petty officer. You've handled worse than this. You'll handle this too. I wanted to believe her. That afternoon, I managed to get through to Dad again. He sounded stronger, more alert. Sarah, thank God, listened to me carefully. I checked my accounts, Dad. I know what's been happening. He made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a groan. I tried to stop her. When I found out what she was doing, I threatened to go to the police, to divorce her, but she said... He stopped. His breathing labored. She said if I did, she'd make sure you never saw a dime of your inheritance. That she'd tie everything up in court for years. That she'd claim I was mentally incompetent, and she'd been acting in my best interest. Dad, slow down. You're going to hurt yourself. I documented everything, he continued, ignoring me. Every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. It's all in a folder in my filing cabinet, the locked one in the garage. The key is in my toolbox, in the bottom drawer, taped under the tray. Dad, I was going to take care of this before you came home. I was going to make sure she couldn't hurt you. But then my heart... His voice broke. Sarah, I'm so sorry I let you down. You didn't let me down, I said fiercely. She did this, not you. When you come home, you get that folder. It has everything you need. Bank statements, emails, proof of forgery. I even hired a private investigator for a month. It's all there. I will, I promise. And Sarah? Be careful around her. I don't think she'd physically hurt you, but I thought I knew her. And I was wrong about a lot of things. That conversation haunted me for the next 3 months. I did exactly what Lieutenant Commander Patterson told me to do. I documented everything, checking my accounts obsessively during my off-watch periods, watching the balances drop lower and lower. I revoked the power of attorney, which slowed the bleeding but didn't stop it. Turns out Patricia had been busy opening credit cards in my name too, using my spotty communication and overseas status to her advantage. I tried calling her. She didn't answer. I tried emailing. She responded with bland reassurances that everything is fine and you're worrying over nothing, and my personal favorite, your father would want us to stick together as a family during this difficult time. My father, who was slowly recovering in a rehabilitation facility, who called me when he could and sounded weaker each time, who kept telling me to get the folder, to make sure I got the folder. I counted down the days until the Halsey pulled back into port like a prisoner counting down to parole. And then, 2 weeks before we were scheduled to return to Norfolk, I got the call. I was running a training drill in the engine room when Chief Ramirez found me, his face serious. Morrison, you need to come with me, now. I knew before he said it. You always know. It's your father, he said quietly once we were in the passageway. I'm sorry. Dad's second heart attack was massive, unsurvivable. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Patricia found him in the garden, she told me over the satellite phone, her voice thick with tears that I didn't trust for a second. He'd been planting tomatoes, she said. He'd always loved tomatoes. That part was true, at least. He had loved tomatoes. Beefsteak tomatoes, the kind Mom used to grow in the backyard before she got sick. I flew home on emergency leave in a haze of grief and rage that I couldn't separate. The Navy gave me 2 weeks, and I spent the first flight staring at the bulkhead of the C-130, trying to process the fact that I'd never hear his voice again, never get another email signed, Love, Dad, never have him there to call when things got hard. Patricia met me at the airport with a hug that felt like a performance. She smelled like expensive perfume, and I noticed her nails were freshly done, a deep red that reminded me of blood. "I'm so glad you're home," she said into my shoulder. "We'll get through this together." I didn't answer. I just picked up my sea bag and followed her to the car, a car I didn't recognize, something expensive and foreign. "New car?" I asked. Oh, yes. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "My old one died, and I needed something reliable. I hope you don't mind. I used some of the joint account funds. Your father would have wanted me to be safe. The joint account that Dad's pension went into. The money he'd earned through 25 years of civil service, now funding Patricia's lifestyle upgrades." I stared out the window and said nothing. The funeral was small. Dad hadn't had much family, and most of his friends were either dead or too old to travel. I stood at the graveside in my service dress blues and listened to the chaplain say words about a man he'd never met, and I felt nothing but emptiness. Patricia cried beautifully. I wondered if she'd practiced. After, at the house I'd grown up in but barely recognized anymore, Patricia had indeed redecorated, and Mom's touches were completely gone. People came by with casseroles and condolences. I shook hands and accepted hugs and said, "Thank you for coming," until the words lost all meaning, and all I could think about was the folder, the garage, the filing cabinet, the key. But Patricia was everywhere, hovering, watching, asking if I needed anything, suggesting we go through Dad's belongings together, as a family, when things settled down. "I know this is hard," she said, cornering me in the kitchen while I was trying to escape the well-meaning neighbors. "But we're going to be okay. You and me, we're family now." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the designer dress she was wearing to my father's funeral reception, at the jewelry I'd seen on the credit card statements, at the face of a woman who'd stolen from me while I was at sea, who'd manipulated my dying father, who was now trying to play the role of grieving widow and concerned stepmother. "Yeah," I said. "Family." That night, after everyone left and Patricia went to bed, I waited. I waited until I heard her door close, until I heard the sound of water running in her bathroom, until the house fell into the particular kind of silence that meant everyone was asleep. Then I went to the garage. Dad's toolbox sat on his workbench, covered in a thin layer of dust. He hadn't been able to work out here much after his first heart attack. I opened the bottom drawer, found the tray, and felt underneath it. The key was exactly where he said it would be. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the filing cabinet. The drawer stuck a little, swollen with humidity, and I had to wrestle it open. Inside were files neatly labeled in Dad's handwriting: tax returns, insurance, vehicle records. And there, in the back, Sarah's protection, open only if necessary. I pulled it out and sat down right there on the garage floor, my back against the workbench, and opened it. The first page was a letter addressed to me. "Sarah Bear," it began, and I had to blink back tears. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've found what I've been hiding from Patricia. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stop this sooner. I'm sorry I didn't see who she really was until it was too late. But I couldn't leave you defenseless. Everything you need is in this folder. Bank records, credit reports, documented lies, proof of forgery. I even hired an investigator. His information is here too, and I've paid him through the end of the year. He'll help you if you need it. Don't let her get away with this. You're my daughter, and you're a fighter. Your mother raised you to be strong, and the Navy made you stronger. Fight for yourself the way you've fought for this country. I love you more than anything. I'm proud of you every single day. Dad." I sat there in the dark garage, reading my father's last words to me, and I let myself cry for the first time since I'd gotten the news of his death. Then I wiped my eyes, stood up, and started reading, which brings me back to Patricia's kitchen, to the folder on the table between us, to the moment when everything changed. She'd been scanning the documents for 10 minutes now, her face growing paler with each page. I watched her try to formulate defenses, watched her discard them, watched her finally arrive at the truth. There was no talking her way out of this. "Sarah," she finally said, closing the folder with trembling hands. "I know this looks bad." "It doesn't look bad," I said calmly. "It is bad. $47,000, Patricia. You stole $47,000 from me while I was deployed. You used my power of attorney to drain my accounts, open credit cards in my name, and max them out. And when my father found out, when he tried to stop you, I didn't kill him," she said quickly. Too quickly, I leaned forward. "Didn't you?" His heart was weak. The doctor said he could live for years with proper medication and care. The same medication you were in charge of. The same appointments you were responsible for scheduling. I flipped to page 15 again, pointing at the highlighted sections. 6 missed appointments in the 4 months before he died. 3 prescriptions not refilled on time. And here, I found another page. His life insurance policy. The one he increased 6 months before his death, naming me as the sole beneficiary. Except someone submitted a change of beneficiary form 2 months before he died, making it payable to you instead. Patricia's face went white. "I don't know anything about that." "Really? Because the signature looks an awful lot like the ones on all these fraudulent checks." I pulled out a comparison sheet the private investigator had prepared. Handwriting analysis is pretty sophisticated these days. And Dad was smart enough to keep samples of your signature. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I want you to leave." "This is my house now," I said quietly. "Well, half mine, according to Dad's will, which you can't touch because it was drafted before you married him and I'm his biological child. So actually, Patricia, I think you should leave." "You can't kick me out of my own home." "Watch me." I pulled out my phone and made a show of scrolling through my contacts. "I've got an attorney on retainer now. Want to guess what we've been discussing for the past week?" She stared at me, calculation and fear warring on her face. "I'm going to give you a choice," I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You have 2 options. Option 1, you sign a repayment agreement for every penny you stole, plus interest. You move out of this house within 30 days. You don't contest anything in Dad's will. And in exchange, I don't press criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and, depending on what the investigation into Dad's medical care turns up, potentially negligent homicide." "You wouldn't," she breathed. "Try me. I've stood watch in combat zones that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. This is easy." Patricia sat back down hard. "What's option 2? I take everything in this folder to the police, to the bank, and to a lawyer. I file criminal complaints, civil suits, and I make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what you did. Every church lady, every book club member, every person at the country club you've been schmoozing with my father's money. And then I watch you go to prison while I rebuild my life from the bankruptcy you've left me in." Silence filled the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the clock on the wall, the sound of Patricia's ragged breathing. "How do I know you won't go to the police anyway?" she asked finally. "You don't. You'll just have to trust me the way I trusted you when I gave you that power of attorney." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I'll need a lawyer to review the agreement," she said, her voice hollow. "Fine, you have 48 hours. After that, I'm filing a police report." She stood up slowly, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe she'd thought I'd come home broken and grieving, easy to manipulate. She'd underestimated the woman my father raised and the sailor the Navy made. "You've changed," she said. "Yeah," I agreed. "The Navy does that." But it wasn't the Navy that changed me. It was her. The next 48 hours were surreal. Patricia didn't leave the house, but she stayed in her room, coming out only for food and water. We didn't speak. The silence was thick with everything unsaid, everything that couldn't be unsaid now. I used the time to continue my investigation, The private investigator Dad had hired, a retired cop named Mike Brennan, had been thorough. Beyond thorough, he documented not just the financial fraud, but Patricia's entire history. 2 previous marriages, both ending in divorce after substantial settlements, a pattern of targeting older men with assets and adult children who were conveniently absent. She wasn't just a thief. She was a professional. Your dad figured it out about 8 months before he died, Brennan told me over the phone. He hired me after he found the first irregularities in your accounts. Smart man, your father. He knew he couldn't confront her without proof, so he let her keep digging her own grave while he documented everything. Why didn't he just divorce her immediately? He tried, but she threatened to drag it out, to claim he was mentally incompetent from his heart condition, to tie up all his assets, including the house. She said she'd make sure you came home to nothing but legal bills and debt. Your dad couldn't risk it, not with your deployment extended. So he played the long game, documented everything, modified his will, made sure you'd be protected when the time came. And then he died. Yeah, Brennan sighed. Heart attacks are convenient that way. Look, I'm not saying she killed him. That's for a medical examiner to determine. But I will say that stress can trigger cardiac events, and your father was under a hell of a lot of stress those last few months. I closed my eyes. You think she knew that? I think Patricia Cline is very good at understanding what motivates people and what destroys them. And I think your father loved you enough to hold on as long as he could, trying to make sure you'd be okay. After I hung up, I found myself in Dad's bedroom, the master bedroom that Patricia had redecorated beyond recognition. None of his things were visible anymore. The fishing photos were gone, replaced by abstract art. His worn leather chair was missing. Even the smell was different, all floral and chemical instead of old spice and old books. It was like he'd been erased. I opened his closet and found a single box shoved in the back corner. Inside, his service awards from his government job, his wedding ring from when he married Mom, photos of the 3 of us from before Mom got sick, before Patricia, before everything fell apart. And at the bottom, a smaller folder labeled, "In case I don't make it." Inside was a letter to me and a letter to Patricia. The one to me I couldn't read yet. Too raw, too soon. But the one to Patricia, I opened it. Patricia, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you probably think you've won. You haven't. I've made sure Sarah will be protected from you. Everything you've stolen, every lie you've told, every manipulation you've executed, it's all documented. And if you're smart, you'll take whatever deal my daughter offers you and disappear from our lives forever. You preyed on a lonely widower and his deployed daughter, and you should be ashamed. But I suspect shame isn't something you're capable of feeling. So instead, I'll just say this. You will not destroy Sarah the way you tried to destroy me. She's stronger than both of us. Tom, I sat on the floor of his closet, holding the letter, and felt something shift inside me. He'd known, even at the end, even sick and scared, he'd been protecting me. That night, I made a decision. Patricia's lawyer was a slick-looking guy named Richard something, who showed up at the house exactly 48 hours after our kitchen table confrontation. He had the kind of face that suggested he specialized in helping people get away with things. We sat in the dining room, me, Patricia, Richard, and my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park, who'd come highly recommended by Lieutenant Commander Patterson. Jennifer laid out the terms. Patricia would repay $47,000 plus interest over 5 years through a structured payment plan. She would vacate the house within 30 days. She would sign a confession acknowledging the fraud. And in exchange, I would not press criminal charges. Richard countered with objections about the confession being unusable in court anyway, about the payment plan being too aggressive, about Patricia's right to half the marital assets. She has no right to assets she acquired through fraud, Jennifer said coolly. And if you'd like to test that theory in court, I have 18 months of documented theft that say otherwise. The negotiation took 4 hours. Patricia barely spoke, letting Richard do all the talking. But I watched her, the way her jaw tightened when Richard suggested a smaller repayment amount, the way her eyes flickered to me when Jennifer mentioned the criminal charges. She was calculating, still playing angles. "My client has a counteroffer," Richard finally said. "She'll agree to all terms, including the confession and vacating the property. But she wants the repayment period extended to 7 years, and she wants assurance that Mrs. Morrison, Ms. Klein, rather, will not face social or professional reputational damage as a result of this agreement." I almost laughed. She wants me to keep quiet about what she did? My client values her privacy. Your client stole from a deployed service member and possibly contributed to my father's death through medical neglect. And she wants me to protect her reputation? Jennifer put a hand on my arm, a gentle warning not to let emotion drive the negotiation. "We'll agree to 6 years," Jennifer said. "And Ms. Morrison will not proactively disclose the details of this agreement to third parties. However, if Patricia violates any terms of the agreement, or if Miss Morrison is questioned by authorities or financial institutions, she reserves the right to tell the complete truth." Richard looked at Patricia. She nodded, her face expressionless. "Fine," he said. We signed the papers right there. Patricia's signature was shaky, nothing like the confident forgeries she'd executed on my bank forms. I wondered if her hand was trembling from fear or rage. When it was done, Jennifer packed up her briefcase efficiently. "I'll file this with the court tomorrow. You'll each get copies? And Patricia—" She looked directly at my stepmother. "I'll be monitoring those payments personally." Miss Even One. And we're back in front of a judge. After they left, Patricia and I stood in the hallway, surrounded by the belongings she'd already started packing. "I'll be out by the end of the week," she said, not looking at me. "Good. For what it's worth." She stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at her. "How far did you mean for it to go?" She finally met my eyes. "I was in debt. Bad debt. The kind that comes with threats. When I married your father, I thought—" She laughed bitterly. "I thought I'd found safety. A stable man with a pension and a house and a daughter who was never around. It was supposed to be simple. And then I had money saved up, and you couldn't help yourself. And then your father got sick, and I panicked. The medical bills, the uncertainty. I told myself I was just borrowing, that I'd pay it back when things stabilized." Her voice dropped. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know what I did was unforgivable. I wanted you to know it wasn't personal. It was my money," I said quietly. "My future. My father. How much more personal does it get?" She didn't have an answer for that. "I'm sorry about Tom," she said finally. "I know you don't believe me, but I am. He was a good man. Better than I deserved." "Yeah," I agreed. "He was." Patricia turned and walked up the stairs to continue packing. I watched her go, feeling nothing but exhaustion. She moved out 4 days later. I helped her carry boxes to her car, not out of kindness, but because I wanted to make sure she didn't take anything that wasn't hers. She didn't. In fact, she left behind most of the furniture she'd bought, probably because it was all financed, and she couldn't afford to keep making payments. As she loaded the last box into her car, she paused. "The garden," she said. "Your father's tomatoes. They're ready to harvest." I followed her gaze to the backyard, where Dad's tomato plants were heavy with fruit, red and perfect. "I've been watering them," she added. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but he loved those plants." After she drove away, I stood in the driveway for a long time, watching the dust settle. Then I went to the garden. Dad had planted 12 tomato plants in neat rows. I could see where he'd staked them carefully, where he'd mulched around their bases. The last thing he'd done before his heart gave out was tend to these plants. I picked one tomato, still warm from the sun, and held it in my hand. Then I called my mother's sister, Aunt Marie, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "Sarah." She sounded shocked to hear from me. "Honey, I heard about your father. I'm so sorry." "Thank you." I sat down right there in the dirt between the tomato plants. "Aunt Marie, I need help." "Anything. I need help rebuilding my life. My voice cracked. "I need family." "Oh, sweetheart. You've always had family. We're right here." We talked for an hour. She told me about the family I'd lost touch with while I was in the service, about cousins who'd grown up and had kids, about Sunday dinners I was always invited to but never attended, about how they'd reached out after Mom died, but Dad had been so wrapped up in his grief. And then Patricia had appeared, and everything had changed. "She kept him isolated," Aunt Marie said gently. "We tried to visit, but she always had excuses. Tom was tired, or not feeling well, or they had plans. After a while, we stopped trying. I'm ashamed of that now. It's not your fault." "Maybe not, but I should have tried harder." She paused. "What are you going to do now?" I looked around at the garden, at the house, at the life I needed to rebuild from the ashes Patricia had left me with. "I'm going to finish my enlistment," I said. "I've got 18 months left on my contract. And then I'm going to use my GI Bill and go to college like I always planned. Study accounting, maybe, or law. Something that'll help other people who get taken advantage of." "That sounds like something your mother would be proud of." "Yeah," I said, and realized I was crying. "I hope so." The next 18 months passed in a blur of deployments and rebuilding. Patricia made her payments on time. Jennifer made sure of that. The debt slowly decreased, though my credit score was still a disaster that would take years to repair. I worked with the bank to close the fraudulent credit cards, filed identity theft reports, jumped through bureaucratic hoops until I wanted to scream. But slowly, painfully, I started to claw my way back to financial stability. Aunt Marie became my lifeline. We talked on the phone whenever I had satellite access. She sent care packages with actual good snacks, not the healthy ones Rodriguez complained about. She made me promise to come to Sunday dinner when I got out for good. I found a grief counselor through the VA who specialized in military families. Twice a month, when I could manage it from whatever port we were in, I'd call in and talk about Dad, about the anger and the loss and the complicated mess of emotions that came with being betrayed by someone who was supposed to be family. "It's okay to be angry at your father, too," Dr. Simmons told me during one session, "for not protecting himself better, for letting Patricia into your lives, for dying before he could fix everything." "I know it's not his fault," I said. "Knowing and feeling are different things." She was right. I was angry at Dad, even though I knew it was irrational. Angry that he'd been lonely enough to marry Patricia. Angry that he'd trusted her with his medication. Angry that he'd left me alone to deal with this mess. But mostly, I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not calling home more often, for being so focused on my duty that I missed the signs that my father was in trouble. "You can't be everywhere at once," Dr. Simmons said gently. "You were serving your country. That's not a character flaw." It took me a long time to believe her. I also spent time reading Dad's letter, the one he'd left for me in his closet. I couldn't read it all at once. It was too painful, too loving, too full of apologies for things that weren't his fault and pride in accomplishments I didn't feel I'd earned. But one paragraph I kept coming back to. "Sarah Bear, I know this is going to be hard. I know you're going to feel betrayed and angry and maybe even ashamed. Don't be. You did nothing wrong. You trusted someone you thought was family, and she violated that trust. That's on her, not on you. The measure of a person isn't whether they get knocked down, it's whether they get back up. And you, my darling girl, have always been the kind of person who gets back up. I believe in you. I always have. And I always will. Love, Dad. I read those words on hard days, when the debt felt insurmountable and the anger threatened to consume me. I read them when I felt weak or scared or alone. I read them until I almost believed them, and slowly I started to heal. My terminal leave from the Navy came on a Thursday in April, almost exactly 2 years after Dad's death. I drove from Naval Station Norfolk back to the house in my beat-up Honda Civic, the one expense I'd maintained throughout everything, because I needed a way to get around when I was stateside. The house looked different now that it was mine. I'd had the worst of Patricia's decorating removed, bringing back some of Dad's furniture from storage, hanging up Mom's pictures again. It wasn't the same as when I was a kid. It would never be that. But it was mine. Aunt Marie was waiting on the porch with a casserole and a smile. "Welcome home, honey." I hugged her tight, breathing in her familiar scent, lavender and vanilla, the same perfume Mom used to wear. "Come on," she said. "I've got the guest room set up for you until you decide what you want to do with this place." "I'm keeping it," I said. "It's home." We went inside and she showed me everything she'd helped set up. New appliances I'd bought with my discharge bonus, fresh paint in the living room, flowers in Mom's old vases. "Your cousins want to come by this weekend," she said. "I told them to give you a few days to settle, but you know how excited everyone is to see you." "I'd like that." That night, alone in the house, I went out to the garden. The tomato plants were gone now, seasonal, but I'd planted new ones in March before my last deployment ended. They were small still, just starting to bud. I sat in the dirt like I had that day Patricia left, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. Too much had happened for simple happiness. But peace. Acceptance. The understanding that I had survived something that could have destroyed me, and I was still standing. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Park. "Final payment received from P. Klein. Account closed. You're free." 6 years of payments, completed in 4. Patricia had paid off the debt early, probably to be done with me, with this chapter of her life. I wondered where she was now, whether she'd found another mark or whether the agreement had scared her straight. I didn't care anymore. I typed back, "Thank you for everything." Then I opened my banking app and looked at the balance. It wasn't much. Rebuilding from negative $47,000 doesn't happen overnight. But it was mine. Every penny earned honestly, saved carefully, protected fiercely. I thought about what I'd told Aunt Marie that day in the garden, about finishing my service and going to college and helping other people avoid what happened to me. I still wanted that. I pulled up the admissions page for the local university and started an application for their paralegal program. It was a start. Maybe later, law school. Maybe accounting. Maybe something else entirely. But it was forward motion, and that was what mattered. Sunday dinner at Aunt Marie's house was chaos. 15 people crowded around a table meant for 8. Kids running around. Cousins I barely remembered introducing me to spouses and children of their own. The noise was overwhelming after years of shipboard routine and the silence of living alone. But it was good noise. Family noise. My cousin Rachel, who I vaguely remembered as a bratty 10-year-old, but who was now a nurse with 2 kids, cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "I heard about what happened with your stepmom," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." I stiffened. "Who told you?" "Aunt Marie mentioned it. Not details, just that you'd had some trouble." She dried a plate carefully. "My ex-husband cleaned out our joint account while I was on a night shift. Took everything and disappeared. Left me with 3 months' rent due and a maxed-out credit card I didn't know existed." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was smiling, but there was steel underneath. "How did you handle it?" I asked. "Badly at first. Cried a lot. Felt stupid for trusting him. Wanted to quit and move back in with my parents." She shrugged, but then I got angry. And anger is a better fuel than sadness. Turns out. I got a lawyer, got a judgment against him, not that he's ever paid a dime, and I rebuilt. It took time, but I did it. And now I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I know who I am without him. I know I can survive things I didn't think I could survive. She looked at me directly. You will too, you already are. Later, as I was leaving, Aunt Marie walked me to my car. I'm proud of you, she said. Your mother would be proud of you too. I didn't do anything special. I just survived. Surviving is special, Sarah, especially when everything is designed to make you crumble. She hugged me tight. You're a Morrison. We're stubborn like that. Driving home, I thought about survival, about the difference between just enduring and actually living, about how the past 2 years had taught me that I was stronger than I thought, but also more vulnerable than I wanted to admit. And I thought about forgiveness. Not for Patricia. I didn't owe her that, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get there. But for myself, for being human, for being hurt, for being angry, for not being perfect. 6 months after my discharge, I got a letter. It was forwarded from my old Navy address, postmarked from somewhere in Nevada, no return address. Inside was a single page in Patricia's handwriting. Sarah, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know that I finished the payments early because I got a job. A real job, working in accounting for a small firm. It's honest work, and it pays enough to live on if you're careful. I've been going to therapy, trying to understand why I am the way I am, why I hurt people. My therapist says I probably won't ever fully understand it. That some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed, only managed. I think she's right. I'm sorry for what I did to you and to your father. I know sorry doesn't mean anything coming from me. I know it doesn't undo the damage. But I wanted you to know that I think about it every day. I think about Tom and how he tried to help me even when he knew what I was. I think about you and the future I stole from you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for you. I know I destroyed any right to your good opinion. But for myself and for the next person who might have made the mistake of trusting me. I hope you're happy. I hope you're in school, or building the life you wanted, or doing whatever makes you feel whole. You deserve that, Patricia. I read it 3 times, standing in my driveway with the mail in my hand. Then I took it inside, put it in the folder with all the other documents from that nightmare, the evidence, the agreement, the final payment confirmation, and closed the drawer. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I would. Maybe someday I'd have something to say to her that wasn't just anger. But that day wasn't today, and I was okay with that. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about the other person. It was about yourself. About deciding how much space you wanted to give the pain, how long you wanted to carry the anger. I wasn't ready to set it down completely, but I was learning to carry it differently. Not as a weight that crushed me, but as a reminder of what I'd survived, of who I'd become in spite of everything. 2 years after that letter, I graduated from the paralegal program. Aunt Marie came to the ceremony, along with Rachel and half a dozen other relatives I'd reconnected with. I walked across the stage in my cap and gown, accepted my certificate, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not in spite of what Patricia had done, but because of how I'd responded to it. I'd survived, I'd rebuilt, I'd turned pain into purpose. I got a job at a firm specializing in elder law and estate planning, helping families protect themselves from exactly the kind of predatory behavior Patricia had engaged in. Every client I helped felt like a small victory, like taking something terrible and transforming it into something useful. It wasn't the career I'd planned before Patricia, but it was meaningful in ways I hadn't expected. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, 3 years after he'd passed, I went to the cemetery. I brought flowers, the kind Mom used to like, and a basket of tomatoes from his garden, which I'd maintained religiously. I sat by his grave and told him everything about the house, about school, about the job, about the family I'd reconnected with, about Patricia's letter and my decision not to respond, about the life I was building from the ruins she'd left me with. "I'm okay, Dad," I said out loud, not caring if anyone heard me. "I'm actually okay. You'd be proud of me, I think. Or at least, I hope you would be." The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was him, telling me he was proud, that he'd always been proud, that I was exactly the daughter he'd raised me to be. Strong, resilient, fair, forgiving, eventually, but never forgetting. I left the tomatoes on his grave, he would have appreciated that, and drove home to the house that was finally, completely mine. If my story moved you or reminded you of someone in your life, or if you've ever faced a moment where you had to stand up alone, feel free to share your own story. And if you want more like this, I'd be honored if you'd stay with me for the next one. Because here's what I learned from all of this. Betrayal doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. The people who hurt us don't get to write our endings. We do. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's rebuilding. It's getting up every day and choosing to move forward, even when forward is the hardest direction to go. My stepmother tried to bury me in debts and lies. But my father's love, even from beyond the grave, gave me the tools to dig myself out. And I learned that I was capable of more than I ever imagined. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just enduring, but transforming pain into purpose. That's not a happy ending. It's better than that. It's a real one.